To the other guests at table 9, I was just the woman refilling their water glasses. That's the thing about working in hospitality. You become invisible in the nicest possible way. People talk around you, over you, through you, like you're part of the furniture, like the white linen and the centerpiece and the little flickering candle that nobody actually looks at. They hand you their empty plates without making eye contact. They wave you off mid-sentence. And you learn to be grateful for it, because invisibility is how you do your job well. I'd been a server at Hollingsworth's for 3 years by then. It's a restaurant on King Street West in Toronto. The kind of place where the tasting menu starts at $220 per person before wine. Where the lighting is always just dim enough to make everyone look a little more beautiful than they are. And where the clientele includes Bay Street lawyers, tech founders who'd sold their second startup, and the occasional city councilor pretending they can afford it on a public salary. I knew the regulars by their drink orders. I knew which tables tipped well and which ones ran you ragged for 18%. I knew my place. And I liked it, most of the time. That Thursday in March, the reservation for table 9 came in under the name Whitmore. Party of 4, 7 o'clock. I didn't think anything of it. I had 5 other tables that evening. A new girl on the floor, who kept asking me where we kept the extra napkins, and a headache building behind my right eye that I was trying to ignore with caffeine and willpower. But then the Whitmore party arrived, and something shifted. He walked in first, the man the reservation was under, I assumed. Late 40s, broad-shouldered in a charcoal blazer that fit the way expensive things fit, like it had been made for exactly his body. Dark hair silvering at the temples. The kind of face that looked like it had made a lot of difficult decisions, and hadn't lost sleep over most of them. His wife came in beside him. A woman a few years younger, elegant in that particular way that reads as effortless but costs a fortune, her hand resting in the crook of his arm with the comfortable weight of a long marriage. They moved through the room like people who were used to moving through rooms. Behind them came a younger couple. The daughter, clearly. Same jaw, same posture as the wife, the resemblance immediate and unmistakable. She was maybe 30, beautiful in an anxious kind of way, her smile a little too wide at the edges, her eyes darting once toward her husband before settling back to neutral. The husband was younger than I expected. Early 30s. Lean, quietly watchful, a dark suit with no tie. He shook hands with the older man at the table, and I caught it. Just for a second, the way his shoulders didn't relax when he let go. I went over to greet them, introduced the evening's menu, asked about sparkling or still, smiled exactly the way I'd smiled at 1,000 tables before. The older man, I'll call him my customer's father-in-law, because that's what he was, ordered a bottle of Barolo without looking at the list. His wife asked about the halibut special. The daughter laughed at something her mother said. The younger man, the husband, said nothing. He was watching the room. I came back with the wine and the bread service, and that's when I noticed the older couple's body language had changed. It's hard to explain how you learn to read tables. You just do, after a while. There's the couple on a first date. One of them always talks too much. There's the business dinner where one person is being managed. There's the table where someone is about to get a promotion, and everyone already knows it. You read the energies the way you read the room temperature. And that table, something was wrong. The father-in-law was leaning in toward his wife. Not in a warm way, in a consulting way. Their heads tilted together for just a moment. Just a fraction of a second. And then they straightened again, perfectly composed, perfectly pleasant, as the daughter was saying something about a vacation they were planning. The younger man, the husband, hadn't touched his bread. I went to the service station to check on another table's order, and our sommelier, a gentle giant of a man I've worked with since my first week, leaned over and said quietly, "Table 9 seems tense." I said, "Yeah." He said, "You know who that is? The younger guy?" I said I didn't. He said, "The husband was someone's significant. He'd read something about him in the business section. Something about a development company, a major waterfront project, a name that had come up in some city hall dispute about zoning. Someone with reach, someone with the kind of pull that made other people nervous. I looked at him differently after that. Not the way other people looked at him. Not with deference or curiosity, with attention. because I'd seen the father-in-law's eyes flick to the younger man's drink twice in 2 minutes, and I'd seen the mother glance at her phone beneath the table and then set it face down on her lap, and I'd seen the daughter reach across and touch her husband's wrist and say something that made him nod, just once, slow and controlled, and none of it felt like a normal family dinner. It felt like a Last Supper, and I didn't know yet who was supposed to be crucified. I went to the kitchen to pick up an order for table 12 and nearly walked into one of the prep cooks, who apologized and stepped aside. I murmured something back and went past him, and that's when I saw it. On the shelf just inside the kitchen door, tucked behind a stack of linen napkins that no one had moved yet from the afternoon setup, was a phone. Not a restaurant phone. A personal phone. A cheap prepaid-looking thing with a cracked screen lit up with a notification. I wouldn't have thought anything of it, except that I saw the name on the notification before the screen went dark. The name was a shortened version of something. I only caught 2 syllables, but they were 2 syllables that matched the surname the sommelier had just told me. Not the father-in-law's name, the husband's name. I stood there for 3 full seconds, holding a plate of duck confit, feeling something cold settle in my chest that had nothing to do with the kitchen. I set the plate down. I shouldn't have done what I did next. I absolutely should not have. But I've spent my whole adult life reading rooms, and every instinct I'd developed in 31 years of being alive was telling me that something terrible was about to happen at table 9, and that the person who was going to suffer for it didn't know yet. I picked up the phone. The screen had gone dark again. I touched the side button. Not to unlock it, I didn't have the code, just to wake it up enough to see the notification again. There was a message. The preview showed a time and an instruction. It said, "Before dessert." Nothing else. Just those 2 words and a timestamp for 9:15. It was 8:47. I put the phone back exactly where I found it. I walked out of the kitchen. I picked up the duck confit and delivered it to table 12, and refilled someone's sparkling water and smiled and said, "Yes, the kitchen can do that without butter, and no, the dessert menu does include a gluten-free option." And the whole time my heart was going at a pace that I was trying very hard not to show on my face. I had 28 minutes. Here is the thing about decisions like this. People think they would know, in the moment, exactly what to do. They think they would be brave, or they think they would be sensible, or they think they would call the police, or they think they would stay out of it, because maybe they'd misread everything, and they'd just be making a fool of themselves. People think they know what they'd do. I didn't know. I genuinely didn't know. I thought about it in the 18 seconds it took me to walk from table 12 back to the service station. I turned it over fast, the way you turn things over when you don't have time to do it slowly. The phone could belong to anyone. The message could mean anything. I could be catastrophizing a family dinner because a couple of older people looked tense and a man didn't eat his bread. I could be about to humiliate myself and endanger my job and alarm an entire table of people for no reason whatsoever. Or I could be the only person in that room who'd seen what I'd seen. I thought about the daughter's face, the way her smile was working too hard, the way she'd touched her husband's wrist like she was steadying herself rather than steadying him. I thought, she doesn't know either, and that was the thing that decided it, not bravery, not certainty. Just the image of that young woman sitting across the table from her parents, believing that this was a normal dinner, believing she was safe, believing the people who'd raised her were here tonight for the same reasons they'd always been here. Love, family, a bottle of wine, and a chance to sit together. She didn't know, and her husband didn't know, and I did. I walked back to table 9. I refilled the husband's water glass first. Standard move, nothing to see. The kind of thing servers do 600 times a night. I leaned in to reach across the table in the precise way that looks like professional service and allows you to speak at the volume of a murmur. "I need 30 seconds of your time," I said. "Alone. Service corridor now." I straightened up. I didn't look at him. I picked up an empty bread basket from the edge of the table and walked toward the corridor door as though I had a very specific reason to be going there, which I did. I didn't know if he'd follow me. He did. He was behind me in less than a minute, and the door had barely swung shut behind him when he said, quietly and without alarm, What is it? Not a question. He already knew something was wrong. That told me everything. I told him quickly. The phone, the message, the timing. I gave him exactly what I'd seen, nothing more, no interpretation, no drama, just the facts, the way you'd relay an order to the kitchen. He listened without interrupting. His face didn't change, but his eyes did, just slightly, a kind of recalibration happening behind them, and I saw the moment he decided to believe me. Did they see you look at it? He said. No, you're sure? Yes. He was quiet for 2 seconds. Then, is there another way out of this building? I told him about the staff exit at the back, the loading bay on the side street, the parking structure connected to the building next door, which you could reach through the kitchen if you went past the dry storage and the fire door at the end of the hall. And if you happened to know the code, which staff used to prop it open during summer patios, and which was still the same because no one had changed it since 2022. He looked at me for a moment that was exactly as long as it needed to be. There was nothing romantic in it, nothing cinematic. It was just recognition. One person acknowledging another. The woman with me, he said. My wife. I know. She doesn't know anything about this. I know, I said again. He nodded once. How long do I have? 20 minutes, maybe less. He reached into his jacket pocket, and I thought for a wild second that he was going to hand me something, money, or a card, or something that would make this feel like a transaction, and I would have hated that. But he didn't. He just straightened his jacket, the way a man straightens himself before he goes back into a room and does something very difficult. Thank you, he said. He pushed back through the door. I stood in the corridor for a moment. My hands were steady. I was surprised by that. I went back to work. I checked on table 7. I brought someone a new fork. I answered a question about whether the risotto was made with vegetable stock. Normal things. The entirely normal things that make up an evening. From across the room, I watched the husband return to the table, watched him sit down, watched him pick up his wine glass and say something that made his wife laugh. A real laugh, not the strained one from earlier. I watched the father-in-law's mouth thin slightly at the edges, just for a second before he smiled. I watched the mother pick up the menu she hadn't needed to pick up. 6 minutes later, the husband said something to his wife. I couldn't hear it. She looked at him, surprised, then questioning, then something that settled into trust. She put her napkin on the table. She picked up her clutch. He said something to the older couple. I could read the shape of it. Something easy, something apologetic, so sorry. Early morning, you know how it is. And the father-in-law's face did something very complicated very briefly before it composed itself into warmth. They were out of their seats in under 3 minutes. I watched the husband's hand at the small of his wife's back as they moved through the restaurant. I watched her say something to him as they reached the front of the room, and he turned to answer her, and there was something in his expression. Not relief. Not yet, but the first hint of it beginning to come through. They were gone. The older couple sat at the table. I watched them from the service station. The father-in-law looked at his phone beneath the table. I saw it from 15 feet away, the way the light caught his face from below. Whatever he read made the skin around his jaw tighten. He said something to his wife that I couldn't hear. She looked at the door. They sat like that for a while. I sent the new girl over to check on them and watched her hover awkwardly and come back to tell me. They said they were waiting for the others to return. I said of course, and refilled their water jug and smiled at them the way I'd smiled at 1,000 tables. I don't know exactly what happened after that night. I never learned the full story. That's not how real life works. You get one corner of it, one angle, one flash of something you can't fully see, and then the moment closes and you're still there with your water jug, and someone at table 5 needs the dessert menu. What I know is that 2 days later, a woman came into the restaurant during lunch service. She was well-dressed, well put together, a little older than me, and she sat at the bar and ordered a coffee and asked if she could speak with whichever server had worked table 9 on Thursday evening. They sent her to me. She said she was the wife. She said her name, and I recognized it from the reservation and from things I'd half heard over the past 2 days. Because in the days after that Thursday, the name had come up once or twice, in the way that names do when something has started to unravel somewhere. She looked at me for a long moment. Then she said, "I don't fully understand what happened yet. But he told me what you did." I said I was just doing my job. She said quietly, "No, you weren't." We looked at each other. I thought about saying something more, but I didn't. She didn't either. She finished her coffee. She left a $40 tip on a $6 Americano. And she walked out, and I folded her receipt and put it in my apron pocket and went back to work. I've thought about that family a lot in the months since. Not obsessively. I'm not woven into their story, not really. I was just a thread at the edge of it. But I think about the daughter especially. Because in the weeks that followed, the things that came out about her parents, about the debts, about the arrangement they'd made, about the way they'd agreed to something that should have been unthinkable, weren't things she could have known. Not fully. Not in the way that would have let her understand what sitting at that dinner table really meant. And I keep thinking about what it must have cost her to reckon with all of it. To realize that the people who were supposed to love her most had looked at everything she'd built. Her marriage, her life, her safety, and decided it was something they could trade. I'm not naive about people. You can't work in hospitality and be naive about people. You see too much, you hear too much. You're invisible in too many rooms where real things get said. I know that people make bad choices under pressure. I know that debt does terrible things to people's moral arithmetic. I know that desperation can corrode almost anything. But some things don't corrode. They just break. The father-in-law had a daughter who trusted him. That trust was either worth protecting or it wasn't. And he decided, in some quiet way, over some series of rationalizations I'll never know, that it wasn't. Or that it was worth less than whatever he owed, whatever he feared, whatever hole he'd dug himself into, that he couldn't see a way out of. I don't think there's an explanation for that makes it right. I've tried to think of one. I can't. I've told this story to exactly 2 people. My roommate, the night it happened, when I came home still wired and 2 in my own head to sleep. And a close friend who called me a few weeks later and could tell something had happened and asked me until I told her. My roommate said, "You could have gotten in serious trouble." She's right. I could have. I didn't know enough about the situation to know what I was walking into. And I still don't know everything. And maybe in some version of that night, the phone meant something else entirely, and I made a fool of myself in a service corridor, and word got back to management. And I lost the job I've held for 3 years. But my friend said something that stayed with me. She said, "You were the only one in that room who saw what was happening. So you were the only one who could do anything about it." And that's true. That's just true. The restaurant is the same as it was. King Street still hums on a Thursday night. Table 9 gets reserved and filled and cleared and reset. I carry water jugs and bread baskets and smile at people who look through me like I'm part of the furniture, and I do my job, and I watch rooms. I've always watched rooms. I think I always will.